citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voice.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast. Each week, we focus on solutionaries with innovative solutions to some of the terrible problems facing our world. There are so many people who are giving us in-depth look at the problems that seem so overwhelming. We like to focus on the solutions. And today, we have two very special guests. Well, one is, of course, super special. You might guess the reason. It's Aura Kanegis, who is the director of the American Friends Service Committee, Washington, D.C. office. She's the director of public policy. And along with my daughter Aura, we also have Merle Lefkoff, who is president of the Center for Emergent Diplomacy. And she does some very interesting behind the scenes, really innovative approaches toward diplomacy. We also have, as just, of course, all of you wonderful guests. And one of our wonderful guests today is Hillel Hadari, who is in Israel. So he will have to leave early, so we will give him a chance to comment maybe 10 or 15 minutes into the talk here. Let me start by welcoming both of you and saying how pleased I am to have you here on the podcast. Let's start with Aura to maybe give us a little introduction, just briefly. I understand that the American Friends Service Committee was the winner of a Nobel Peace Prize in 1947.
That's right. That reflected on our work through World War II and our work afterward, working on refugee resettlement. And then based on that experience, we were asked in 48 to help with refugee resettlement in the Gaza Strip. After about a year of that, we said that it was time to have refugees returned. That was our principle globally about refugees. They should have a right of return, and handed over operations to the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which, as you know, continues today to administer programs for refugees who have not been returned. So since 48, AFSC has worked with Palestinians, with Israelis, and with the international community to realize a just and lasting peace between Palestinians and Israelis. In the US, AFSC supports efforts to change government policies and corporate and institutional practices that support inequality, the Israeli occupation, and denial of refugees' rights. And in the region, AFSC challenges the fragmentation of Palestinian society and the militarization of Israeli society to support the implementation of international humanitarian and human rights law. We work on promoting calls for full equality between Palestinians and Israelis and security for everyone. And so that's a little bit about what AFSC does.
That seems to be a crucial thing to develop our common security. Let me let Merle just briefly jump in with an introduction to how the Center for Emergent Diplomacy is involved in the Middle East.
Our center is, for many decades, has been doing what's called Track 2 diplomacy, which is back channel, usually quite secret. For those of you who remember the Oslo process, that was a Track 2 back channel process. And that's what we do. And I've been working in the Middle East, specifically, mostly in Israel and Palestine for 40 years now. And what our organization does now is we apply. I closed down our organization for 4 years. I got a grant to go to Los Alamos National Laboratory to the Center for Nonlinear Studies, which is a think tank at Los Alamos, believe it or not, that isn't thinking about nuclear weapons, but actually thinking about some other wonderful things. And because I wanted to work with physicists and mathematicians and computer scientists to see if there were any new ideas, because it was clear to me that peace was not happening in the Middle East, especially between Israel and Palestine, and that there probably was no chance that a two-state solution would ever happen. We have a one-state solution now, of course, with Israel in control. So I spent 4 years at the center, And we now apply the principles actually and of complex adaptive systems that's been developed at the Santa Fe Institute. So the fact that I was in Santa Fe is what attracted me to looking for completely new problem-solving processes, because it was clear to me that the old conflict resolution processes were not working. So we're devoting now almost all our time to climate change work, climate catastrophe that's coming. I work with a lot of climate scientists now. And I'm also involved in a back channel project in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, in Gaza. So I'm happy to say what I can at this point about that. I was actually in Israel right before the pandemic hit. So I never give up hope. And I'm just so delighted, Arthur, that you want to do something on Israel and Palestine now.
Right.
It's a really moment to do this. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you. And that sounds very intriguing. And of course, we know you have to keep it secret, but we will be interested in learning what we can about that. Now, Ora, maybe you can tell us a little more. I know you've also, when you were in Israel, experienced much of what the occupation is about firsthand and so on. What are your perspectives now on what's going on in the Middle East, and what opportunities are there? You mentioned you're working for peaceful conflict resolution. Where have there been successes, and what do you see as the way moving forward?
Well, I'll start by saying that I was a very reluctant. I was very reluctant to come to this work. My journey of understanding in this area was circuitous, as I think it was for many of us. And as you know, with Lithuanian Jews on one side of our family, I was acutely aware of the devastating impacts of the Holocaust, not just as a historical injustice, but in its impacts in generational trauma. And as a third world studies major at Oberlin, I focused on Africa and Latin America. I avoided the Middle East as much as possible. It seemed complex, and I was full of what many now, what I now understand were fairly Islamophobic biases about the treatment of women, et cetera, when so many cultures globally, including my own, have their own problematic gender biases as well as positive stories to model. So I came in kind of hoping to not ever have to work on Middle East issues. But the more I saw and the more I learned, the more I understood that this situation was not as complicated as it is often made out to be, and that it comes down to human rights principles, just as so many other issues do. And Palestinians have a right to live in their historic lands, and that does not mean that Jews should not be able to do the same, but but everyone has the same human rights, and that whatever state solution plays out needs to have at its base equality. So I mean, I can say a lot about a lot of different elements of this, but I mean, to me, a right to fair livelihood and safety and equal protection against discrimination needs to belong to Jews globally, everywhere. But whenever the paradigm becomes that my security is the preeminent concern at the price of your rights globally, that's not justice. And those are the deeply unjust trade-offs we see so often, whether it be in the US with policing domestically and how that plays out, whether it be the war on terror globally, whether it be how, what happened with the Boers in South Africa. I mean, you often have an oppressed population that is seeking safety and well-being, and it often plays out in a way that displaces another. The US, you have as a history of people trying to escape religious persecution in Europe and coming and persecuting an indigenous population. So I definitely, the decade of my career that I spent working on indigenous issues in the US also informs this for me. And I think in terms of solutions, I mean, we have a lot of time, so we can get into a lot of things, but I think a focus on equality, a focus on the human rights of everyone involved, moving beyond sort of obsession with one state, two state, red state, blue state, and into, what are the rights that everybody needs to have? And I think like the work of anti-racism, there's a perpetual process here that's not an event or arrival and requires a lot of self-examination and questioning the stories we're told about ourselves and our families and our communities, and kind of stepping beyond a knee-jerk defensiveness. You know, in the US, it's often like, my family never had slaves, or I came from a poor family and I never had any white privilege, or oh, so we should abandon our houses now and give them to Native Americans. It's moving beyond those sort of red herring defensive postures to really listen and understand the ways that systemic injustice plays out across generations. So I think the solution lies in some of that return to human rights principles, and certainly in addressing the $3.8 billion a year that the US provides to Israel in ways that there haven't been any forms of accountability. So it's been highly militarizing Israeli society, and a lot of effort to, you know, to equate any challenging of Israeli policies with anti-Semitism, which is, I think, an incredibly dangerous trend that has had a lot of money behind it in the US. So
I could listen to you forever. I just have to tell you that.
Well, I want to briefly, because you talked about the militarization of Israeli society, and since we do have Hillel with us for a little bit longer, I wonder if you might be able to tell us what you observe from the inside about the militarization of Israeli society and how that impacts everything in your lives.
Good morning for me, it's good night. Well, I would like to say, to emphasize three more specific points, maybe not very smart and original, but still I think it's important for me to say it. So first of all, you know, in Israel, I'm considered to be a very extreme left-wing, anti-militarism, anti-nationalism, and still, even from this point of view, still I would like to say it very straightforward. Forgive me for the word I'm going to say now. I think that even though I have a lot of criticism about Israel, about the Israeli government, I think I'm not ashamed to say that Hamas, you know, Hamas, who governs Gaza, they are just real bastards. I mean, it's very important to understand. I'm not saying Israel is perfect, but they are a bunch of very extreme people, very primitive. They don't recognize the right of Israel to exist, regardless of how many territories you will give them. They just don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. They don't have any problem to hide bombs and missiles under hospitals, under schools. So they are just bad guys. I'm sorry to say it so, but I'm not that simple, okay? It is important for me to say it, but still, I'm convinced that the problem, the main problem, is not what happens when they shoot Israel and Israel shoots back. Because of course, if you are shot, I think it's natural. It's even obvious that you have to shoot back to defend yourself. But the main problem is that, you know, in between all these fighting sessions, so to speak, you know, nothing is done. That's the problem. I mean, nothing. I mean, the negotiation with the Palestinians is actually frozen for I think almost 10 years. Nothing is done, even though, if you know, we had the Oslo agreement in the 90s, but still it is stuck for years. And then, okay, it's not very simple to restart it, because, you know, there is Hamas in Gaza and there is the so-called Palestinian Authority / Abu Mazen in Judea and Samaria, or West Bank, yeah. But still, I think it's such a shame that both sides, both leaderships, don't do anything to restart this negotiation. So I think, if to sum up my second point, I think that the fact that till this very day there is no overall complete agreement between the two sides, this is what leaves this conflict, you know, bleeding. And I'm also sure that it affects the conflicts of Israel with other factors like, with Iran, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and even with other Arabic states with which Israel doesn't really have war, but it's very cold relations. So for sure, in my opinion, for sure, this future agreement with Israel with the Palestinians is a key thing to in order to do anything to reach a real peace here. And my last point, even though I'm very much in favor of Israeli-Palestinian agreement, which will for sure include a Palestinian state, still, I don't really believe that this kind of agreement will be a perfect solution. Maybe best case scenario, it will only start a very long process where, so maybe after 100 years or 50 years, there will be a real peace. And that's why, and this is my last line, that's why I'm sure the only real complete solution for this conflict, like for many other conflicts all over the world, is to establish a world democracy in which it will be very simple. Fights between two sides will not be allowed. So, yeah.
My name is George Benker. I wonder whether you consider yourself a Zionist.
Well, no, actually, no. If you speak about Zionism in the original meaning of the word, so Zionism has completed already its historic role, because the Israeli state was established. So, today when people use this word Zionist, each one means different things. But basically, I don't really care about these definitions. I don't see myself Zionist. I don't even see myself a Jew. I don't see myself an Israeli. I mean, technically, I'm Israeli because I live in Tel Aviv. It's Israel, but it's not part of my identity. It's not how I educate my kids. I don't feel, I don't care about all these things.
Yeah, well, I think I do like the important point you raised and which is really central to our work here, and that is that once you do have once we can create a global democracy inside a country like the US, you can have Palestinians, Israelis, you can have all your differences and disagreements, but you're not fighting wars with each other, killing each other. You're finding courts and other ways of interactively resolving problems and getting to connect across the borders that divide us. And so I do think in the long term, I appreciate your vision and being part of this. I'd like to maybe take that as a jumping off point to ask Merle, because you talked about the crucialness of trying to negotiate some agreements. How do you negotiate agreements in a situation with such power disparities where, where one group feels they're occupied and well, just how do you do that? How do you see the backdoor channels working to create communication across such sharp divides?
The asymmetry of power, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you for giving me a chance to say something, is one of the critical problems here. The Palestinians have no power. And also I was interested in the leadership question that came up, which is absolutely true. There's no leadership on either side right now. There's no way to negotiate until Netanyahu is gone, until the PAI that cleans up their act. At any rate, let me tell you where we're going now, because this has to do with the idea of world citizenship. We are destroying the biosphere at the present time. And one of the ways to get Israel to the table is on water issues. And that was one of the things a bunch of us got together to talk about here in the US, who have been working in the Middle East for decades, which was Israel has a reason to come to the table because of the water issue, because they are also having severe drought. Israel has a national water pipeline that makes sure that everybody in Israel gets water, but that doesn't happen in Gaza or in the occupied territories. So, but one of the problems as a result of this inability to share, or this, I don't understand this because Israelis are so smart. not understanding that it's in their interest that everybody has enough water. There's a lot of wastewater, a lot of, please excuse my language, a lot of shit coming over the border from the occupied territories in the West Bank, from Gaza. And so this is an increasing problem for Israel. Now, this sounds very small, but this is part of the larger water issue. So at this moment in time, when more and more people are becoming focused on the calamities that are coming with climate destruction that have already begun and are going to hit the Middle East and already is beginning to, harder than just about anywhere in the world. Sorry, my light just fell down again. Harder than any place in the world except perhaps the Arctic, where I spent some time in the last 2 years also, where the ice is melting. I mean, that's the place where it's happening the fastest. But we see this as an opportunity for some back channel work, for some back channel negotiations. So we have started a project that came to a halt, but it looks promising. Everybody is at the table. And it's all about wastewater to begin with, and then getting into the larger water issue. Water is life all over the planet. And we're just desperate for a way in now with the leadership absent on all sides. I truly believe that the two-state solution has been dead for 20 years now, and it's a distraction about what really needs to be done. And I'm not sure anything can be done until Netanyahu is gone, frankly, but we're trying, and it's a very back channel, but it's also non-threatening. But the security of Israel, as well as all of the Middle East, also depends on making sure that water is shared so that people don't become so desperate that they take up arms. The next war could be about water. I just published an article in the Canadian Army Journal about, as I think I sent you a copy of the cover, Arthur, about what I called the new Cold War in the Arctic, because we had been interviewing up there, and we were interviewing actually indigenous leaders to see what was happening to them in the Arctic. But we also found out about all these military bases, and this is what we call the new Cold War. And I noticed that last Sunday, we published a couple months ago, but the New York Times picked up on that. It did a big article on the new Cold War in the Arctic. So here's the new hot war in the Middle East, right? And water is something that all world citizens need, Arthur, right?
Right.
And water, and we are all at risk now because of what we're doing to our living systems. So this might be a way to begin some collaboration. And in fact, we've found that to be true. As I say, we've had a little hiatus now because of the pandemic. Jordan is also involved because it's been, you know, they have many Syrian refugees there. Jordan is also in a lot of trouble where water is concerned. So Jordan has been brought into these negotiations as well.
I just want to briefly thank you for that, Merle, and share my screen to show you. You've just been mentioning that water is central to the environment, but cooperation restoring hope in the Middle East. This is Echo Peace. And they talk about the border conflicts, Jordan River devastation, and the people, how water is key to that issue. So I think you're on to a really important topic there. So let me go back to, Aura and ask for her comments on the question of, that Hillel raised about the bitterness that's going on and how you see moving forward across the great divides.
I want to just go back and talk about water for a moment because, as you're probably very familiar, Merle, 96% of Gaza's water supply isn't fit for human consumption.
Right.
And that situation is compounded and in part caused by repeated Israeli military attacks on Gaza that have damaged or destroyed key water and sanitation infrastructure. I've seen firsthand that in multiple visits over the last 10 years. And the blockade has barred the repair and replacement of this infrastructure as key materials are prohibited by Israel from entering Gaza. So many aspects of reconstruction are considered dual use. So you could rebuild a house with lumber, but you could also build a tunnel. So you're not allowed to have lumber.
Right.
So the blockade of Gaza is so severe, and the life is just impossible. I mean, you have the Israeli military bombed Gaza's only power plant, and in 2006, and today it still can't function at full capacity, and Gazans have access to electricity for less than 8 hours a day on a rolling basis. When I was there last, it was 4 hours a day. And you never know when it's going to come. So if it comes on at 4 a.m, you quickly, do laundry and do everything that you possibly need in the middle of the night. And I think when it comes to the water issue, there's drought and there are those common concerns, and there's a very man-made disaster certainly in Gaza, with the destruction of infrastructure, and with the blockade that disallows reconstruction and sanitation. But in the West Bank as well. I mean, you see as you alluded, the extreme difference in what water resources are allowed, not just in Israel versus the West Bank, but settlers have access to very different resources,
including swimming pools
in illegal settlements.
Yeah.
So again, it's that combination of the the environmental crises with very man-made, human-made crises in this situation, and I think that brings me to something that I've had to grapple with, which is, in my work, I'm a lifelong Quaker, and I deeply believe in dialogue and in peace building, and have had to grapple with some of the ways that those concepts in this context have been weaponized in some ways, so that we just need the two sides to come together and talk. And as you said, Merle, like, not addressing power differentials when you bring two sides together to talk is deadly, and and basically recreates the oppressions that you might be there to talk about. It's often very edifying for the side with more power in that situation. They learn a lot, but those who are in the situation of oppression are sort of again and again forced to deal with that re-wounding, and I think that was a really hard learning curve for me, and one that when I got it was a real aha for some of the things that sound good toward peace building can be really, really problematic. So I think to what was raised about Gaza and about Hamas, yes, Hamas is a really problematic group, and it has been born out of the politics of the situation, where a population is so oppressed that they're looking for anyone who is going to stand up in some way. And I think I saw a piece recently that I just pulled up from a Jewish group in New Zealand that was speaking to sort of this set of points around, in this era of accusations, how often do we condemn the speech that hates and dehumanizes Palestinians, in reference to the Hamas charter that is so often cited? We have to urgently equalize the hateful, deadly disparity we apply to the dense civilian military intermingling that prevails in both Israel and Gaza. Israel consistently ranks among the most militarized states on earth. Its Ministry of Defense stands in the commercial heart of Tel Aviv. You can't walk a block in Israeli cities without seeing weapons, some carried by men and women wearing uniforms and some not. Gaza is also militarized, some of it visible and some of it concealed, yet we allow ourselves to be told that Israel's army shields civilians while Gaza's civilians are deployed to shield Hamas fighters. Which is it? This perception conditions our understanding of justifiable and wrongful killing. So I think that question of who gets to be militarized and what forms of militarized security and response are okay or not okay is something that I think, as a Quaker and working with a Quaker organization, we often are addressing the ways that state violence is sort of invisible and sanctioned, whereas other armed actors get called out. I think in general, again, it comes back to equality and a situation where we can't create security for any people in the region that is not shared security. The well-being of everybody has to be accounted for if you want long-term well-being for anybody. And so, yes, to what Merle was saying about negotiating on water, I think that's a really important baseline trust-building piece. And I think challenging, because there is this very human-made dimension to it.
Or I said very briefly as we were just beginning that we're not working with any of the peace community. Mm-hmm. And the reason, I'll be honest about it, is there's so much trauma in the peace community, especially among the few Israeli Jews that are courageous and take stands. By the way, that was an interesting exchange at the beginning about, are you a Zionist? I think a better question is, do you believe that there has to be a Jewish state? That's very different than being a Zionist. And that's where the rubber meets the road, because the Holocaust has not gone away. And that historic trauma, which is generational, is what keeps Jews, who are some of the most powerful people in the world at every level, thinking that they're not secure. And so that the history on both sides, the Nakba, in addition to the Holocaust, those stories, as we know, we need new narratives. So the peace community has just, I hate to use the word failed. That's not fair, right? Everybody is trying. This new generation of Israeli Jews, I'm disappointed in. They all voted for, I looked at the statistics, they all voted for Netanyahu. Because Netanyahu says that they're secure and they can lie on their beaches in Tel Aviv, right? So, what we're trying to do here, the people at the table, by the way, are water ministers, hydrologists, techno guys, right? They all speak the same language. They have the same narrative, regardless of whether they're Jordanian, regardless of whether they live in Gaza and can get across and meet with us, or whether they're Palestinian or whether they're Israeli. They speak a common language, and they can talk about a common narrative. So that's what makes this more interesting to us. When I should tell you, I hate to jump around like this, but as Arthur knows, our biggest project right now is we're developing a training manual for a new kind of dialogue process that we call the adjacent possible. The adjacent possible is waiting for us out there, but we've got to change the way we do dialogue and the way we do negotiations. We can't continue to do them the same way because frankly, it hasn't worked. Look at the world now. So this may seem very kind of small, but we think that with moving forward and getting some case studies and some interesting stuff out of this, we can talk about a different way of approaching this problem, because the peace community has not been able to solve the problem. And we believe the solutions are there. We just haven't gone into a different kind of dialogue process in order to reach those solutions. Also, I have also been in dialogue on nuclear disarmament. You know this, Arthur, as well, with Iranians, with North Koreans, by the way, with Israelis, one Israeli delegate who wrote a book called The Best Kept Secret in the World, terrific book on the nuclear program in Israel. And Israel does not today still admit that it has a nuclear program because it doesn't want to join any treaties. So it's not involved in any treaties. This is so complex on so many levels, but it all comes down to security and feeling secure. And so if we can't feel secure about water, right? And then the rest of it is in a way meaningless, and global climate catastrophe is upon us very, very quickly, according to the climate scientists that I work with now, and the Middle East especially hard hit. So we're coming in a different direction with, frankly, a different dialogue process, which we've begun to describe to some extent. We're writing a manual now. I also teach in Canada at the University of Ottawa. So we're writing a training manual to train facilitators in a new kind of dialogue process that we call the adjacent possible, how to reach for those solutions, not to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Because that, as we know, is the definition of insanity. Mm-hmm. So the horror that's going on over there, and in so many places in the world also, is you just detailed some of that so beautifully. It is Israel. You know, they'll talk about the missiles that the Gazans send over, that Hamas sends over. The asymmetry, I think, is what's driving this toward its ultimate conclusion, which is that there's going to continue to be one Jewish Israeli state. And what are Palestinians supposed to do? What are they supposed to do now? The PA is not helping. There's no leadership there either. There was some leadership. I was involved in negotiating. That's how long I've been going, when we were negotiating with the PLO. So there was leadership at one point, and there was hope at one point. And now there's just stagnation, as you said so well.
But I think the younger generation is where there is something really interesting going on. I think.
I hope so. I haven't seen it, so I hope you're right. The American Jew, let me say something about the young American Jews. I mean, one of the things we never talk about is you want to end the militarization in the war? Stop funding it. Stop funding with $3.8 billion, right? It's the biggest foreign funding that we do. $3.8 billion so that this conflict can continue. But young American Jews at universities are being very courageous, because it takes a lot of courage to say anything against the Israeli government. Because as you said earlier, Ara, you're accused of anti-Semitism. You wouldn't believe some of the hate mail I get as a self-hating Jew. That's what people call me all the time. And I'm trying to make peace with you. Yeah. So anyway, all right. So we're trying something completely different. Let's just put it that way.
What you were pointing out, Merle, about Jews in the U.S., I think groups like Jewish Voice for Peace are an amazing, sort of stepping into the framings that have been used to shut down debate, shut down discussion. And I think, you talked about the Israeli peace movement. Look up my colleague, Sahar Vardi. She is incredible and will give you some hope. She also lives an incredibly difficult life because of her resistance. But and in Palestine, I think one of the pieces of work that we do in Palestine is on Palestinian cohesion and building connections between Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in what they call 48 Palestinians in Israel.
Are you talking to the new Palestinian party that has what, four seats in the Knesset now?
We're not involved in the politics side of things, but in terms of some of the people involved, they are the kinds of people who are, again, working on Palestinian cohesion. And I think the Fatah Hamas parties have basically been built to kind of keep things in place and keep people suppressed. And it's I think people in Gaza chose Hamas because they wanted something different. The incredible corruption of Fatah was very real. They were grappling with it, and I think I've heard disillusionment from a lot of people in Gaza, but it certainly the existence of Hamas is a symptom, not a cause of conflict in this situation. And I want to come back to something you raised, Merle, that I think is really important, which is the question of a Jewish state, which is often held up as if you challenge that right, it's an existential challenge to Israel, or
exactly,
it's an anti-Semitic challenge. But I mean, a right to be a Jewish state at essence means you either ethnically cleanse those who are numerically inconvenient, or you do not allow full democratic rights for a particular segment of the population. And that's an approach that we've largely rejected in the modern era in a lot of places. But you know, it's implied that opposing this approach is somehow anti-Jewish, which couldn't be further from the truth, because Jews themselves have been victims of this global game of disappearing inconvenient populations in myriad ways,
Right.
beyond the horror of the Holocaust. I mean, the pogroms that long predated that horror, the discrimination that persists in many places today, that impacts so many other communities. So a right to Jewish life and practice is consistent with universal human rights and absolutely something that must be protected. But a right to a Jewish state in a land with a multitude of cultural and religious groups that are historically connected and currently present is a different matter. And I would say the same about an Islamic state or a Christian state or a state otherwise designated as primarily connected to and accountable to only one culture, race, religion, et cetera. It's not consistent with human rights.
Or I'm constantly challenging my Israeli Jewish friends and saying to them, especially the ones that are so brave, and we know they are there and resisting. One of my best friends worked every day of her life on the Palestinian side to make sure the Palestinians who had been victimized by the IDF had their day in court. And she's Jewish and Israeli. But when I asked her, I said, why can't there, I said, how do you have a Jewish state and have a democratic state at the same time, right? That seems to me a contradiction in terms. You can't have a theocracy and a democracy at the same time. And that's where, as I said, the rubber meets the road. The Jews have to have their own state. And even if you're a Zionist, I consider myself a Zionist because I believe, as what you said, that the Jews have a right to practice their religion and they have a right to be Jews. But do they have the right to have a theocratic state that puts a large percentage of their population in the kind of apartheid situation that we have? I worked both in Northern Ireland, by the way, and I see some intersections here. And I also worked in South Africa right before the end of apartheid. And so all of these experiences are connected for me. And for one reason, I was asking you about this new thing among Palestinian citizens of Israel who are now kind of getting, for the first time ever, I believe, getting interested in the political system as a way in to get more of their just basic needs met in the territories and in Gaza.
Yeah.
It hasn't had, that's something brand new. We're watching that very closely. And in Northern Ireland, you know, once the IRA got involved in the political process, that's when we knew that this Good Friday agreement was going to hold. That's when we knew it would happen.
Well,
and so, yeah, anyway, it's so complex and there's so much to talk about. Sorry.
no, it's terrific. And I think the common thread you both had is so crucial that we need to, that to try to gain security and protection for your rights as Jewish people, as any people, by militarization and trying to destroy the other, just keeps coming back and back and back. And the U.S., again, the most powerful nation in the world with bases all over the world, is one of the most scared countries. And then we threaten nuclear destruction of the planet, you know, growing out of those fears. So I think it's so crucial that we start finding this common security and how we break through. And so I'm so grateful to both of you. I'd like to turn it over to questions. I know we have a lot. And so Melanie, take it.
All right, boy, what an interesting discussion. Thank you for this great back and forth. It was beautiful, fantastic, so informative. Yes, we'd like to go to questions. Our first question we have is from Fried. Fried, go right ahead and ask your question.
I am interested in solutions, so I always look for solutions. And there is a wonderful solution for Palestine since 2002. And it comes from Rand Corporation, which is normally not such a good place. But here they have done a marvelous job to ask who has an idea for to make Palestine a viable state. And there was an American urban architecture bureau, Sussman Architects, who came up with a project, The Ark. I don't know if you ever heard about that. And the idea is that Gaza would be connected via a high-speed train to West Bank. And for this, in this would first become connected as a state. It would connect all the important cities in Palestine. And it would keep the old cities aside, but in a connection via, I show another one. This is the old city at the outside of the train line, the high-speed line, and then the city would be built towards the new train station outside of the city, and then all the needed housing would be possible. It's a project of about 9 billion, and it would give work for hundreds of thousands of people per year. And what the good thing would be that it would build and not, so the attention would change from destroying or surviving to building. And I think it's an absolute wonderful possibility. And you can see at the website rand.org/Palestine the whole project explained in 7 minutes, and if you want longer, for 30 minutes.
Great, thank you, Free. Thank you for that educational information, and very interesting, very interesting. Great, we have another, okay, so yours would like to make a comment or a question. It's yours, if you could go right ahead, please.
I did a PhD, compressed PhD in peace and conflict resolution, and I learned about one-sided stories, or single stories as they call them. So on the previous intervention by Fried, I wonder whether he is informed about the airport in Gaza being funded by European communities, then built by the Israelis, earning money, and then being bombed by the Israeli military. So whatever you would suggest, make sure it can't be bombed by the Israelis, because I feel this story needs a little bit background information. Merle, I'm happy you share concerns about water. It's vital. I'm a nutritionist, so I know water comes before food. But how would you feel water shortage ranks among challenges for Palestinians, like expelled from their housing continuously since 1948, incarceration with a trial, violence by military, racist laws, and many other human rights violations? You can't do without water, but how do you feel the other challenges for Palestinians?
They're terrible. It's a collection of all the human rights abuses, in a way, that we talk about all over the world, and they're all happening here in one place. Truly they are. But we can't stop that as we continue to support this with American money. We can't. You want to stop that part of it? Then make sure there's some kind of uprising that stops $3.8 billion going to the Israeli military. Seriously. It is our biggest foreign gift in America. So people have been trying to stop to stop the settlements, to stop this Israeli project for decades and decades. So the fact, I consider that the climate catastrophe that's happening now provides something new. a new opening to think about this. And I want to get back to the Ark. I have a whole file on the Ark when it came out. I was so excited about this because it seemed to me that it was somebody else going out of the box and thinking beyond the human rights issues that everybody in the world is working on, including the United Nations. You know this, and haven't been able to do anything except extend the rhetoric over and over and over again. The Ark is a visionary project about infrastructure, and about infrastructure that collectively can bring people together in a new way. And it also didn't go anywhere except in the back of my mind. I remember there was a Palestinian, maybe a Palestinian American, who was quite wealthy, a multimillionaire, who went into the territories and started building a new town based on the Ark principles. I'm wondering if Free, do you know about that?
Rawabi.
Yeah, I forgot all about that. Has anything happened with that? Because I think.
Oh yes, I have pictures of it.
Okay, all right. So I love this idea, and if we let go of going after the human rights issues, this will be a tragedy for the Palestinians and for human rights all over the world. This, however, is not what we have chosen to work on, because we are looking for new ideas, new visions, new narratives that could perhaps can intervene in this impasse. It is a complete and total impasse. So do I think water is more important than the human rights issues? No, they're all the same. They're all connected for me. We need all of these things to be human beings on this planet. But where are the new ideas, what we call the adjacent possibles? That's a complex systems term, by the way. Comes out of complexity science. Waiting for new imagination, right? You know, I like to quote Einstein on this. One of my favorite Einstein's quote, imagination is more important than knowledge. The great Einstein quote. So a project like the Ark was so imaginative, but at the same time, it had rigor behind it, right? It had rigor behind it, and that's what we're trying to do as well. Any ideas for solutions now, I think, are worth trying at this time of impasse. But if you really want to stop it, I'm a big believer in social movements, by the way. I'm from the South, so I lived through the civil rights movement, and now we have Black Lives Matter, which is making change every day. So, you know, let's try to defund the war.
Great.
Yes.
Would you feel water is the biggest challenge for the Israeli and might rank like lower than 5 on the list of the Palestinians?
I think it is, but I don't think people realize it yet.
Okay.
Honestly, I think it is because of climate change, and they just haven't gotten there yet because Israel has this wonderful pipeline. But if that pipeline doesn't have water in it that's coming from the north, it doesn't matter how good the pipeline is.
Thank you, Merle. And we have a short time for a super quick question. First from Tom, if you'd like to go ahead, Tom.
It's not really a question, just in reading the comments, you know, I put a really long comment in there, and in reading other people's comments, there seems to be the general consensus that, number one, the Judaic religion is a religion. Zionism was created in the late 1800s as a political movement with real goals that were okay then. But the state of Israel has violated or not complied with nearly every resolution that the United Nations has put on them since 1948 when they became a state. And I believe that our world is crossing that threshold from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. I won't live long enough to see it, but that threshold of going from religion and wars, we're crossing over a 200-year bridge. We're at the end of it into the age of Aquarius, which is the age of technology and peace. And everything that everybody else has said today and shared, Merle, I'm with you 100%. or I'm with you 100%. Arthur, you know me. You know I'm with you 100%. That I'm an optimist. I'm not hoping. I know that our world is changing and that we will see real peace. We won't be spending the trillions of dollars on weapons, but we'll be spending it on ourselves, our lives, our infrastructure, medical needs, everything else. Period. End of story. Thank you for giving me a few minutes.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Merle, Merle, or do you wish to say something?
No, I just want to thank him for those comments.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Tom. And now, quick, we have Joseph comment or question, and then we'll have to end.
Having taught human rights for a number of years, I always think of Shakespeare, who said, "The devil can quote scripture if you will." And at the bottom of all this is belief in dogma. As Howard Zinn used to say, Columbus used to cut off the ears of Indians for the Blessed Trinity. And having gone to the UN a lot, Israel had said before the Human Rights Council, we have an eternal claim to that land. It's biblical. And I question that. And whenever I question that, people shudder, and it's like they want to hit me in the face or something. I'm just questioning it. You know, let's talk about it. And it's a complicated issue because actually I am for Israel because Jews need a safe haven. There's tremendous anti-Semitism out there and they need a safe haven. I just don't think it should be based on some type of biblical dogma. And it's a tough issue.
It's true that it comes down to that sense of safety and security, right? That sense of having been oppressed in many places. What is the answer for well-being? But I think you, as I had said at the beginning, I mean that the Boers were seeking a safe place to be when they went to South Africa and created the apartheid regime to create their security. In the U.S., religious minorities who were persecuted came to the U.S. to have a safe place to be, and they deeply persecuted the indigenous people here. And so that sense that our safety can only be created by having our own thing and our own place that we control, and to the denial of the well-being of others around is a concept that has not served humanity well in so many places in so many ways. And so what are the ways that we can really commit globally, universally, to human rights in a way that says that knits the structures that create that safety and well-being in ways that doesn't come at the expense of somebody else's well-being. And I think that's one of the things that I've certainly learned from my father over the years. And I think it just comes down to that again and again is that safety, you can never be safe enough when your safety is coming at the expense of somebody else's well-being, because they are going to come back and bite you.
Or what if there were a new narrative for Israel that said, anti-Semitism in the world is not the problem that you see in the press. Jews are safer and more powerful than they have ever been. And for that reason, have the opportunity and the challenge to create a new kind of a society. I honestly don't believe that anti-Semitism is huge in the world. I mean, you and I can talk about the statistics on that. That is propaganda, I believe. And it's perpetrated to continue to support what's the safety of the Jewish state. And believing that allows the Israelis to bomb Gaza for their safety. Jews are not around the world at risk. They're some of the most powerful people and moneyed people in the world. And there's a whole history behind that too, as we know. So it's time to wake up to the facts and the reality of this, which is that this is a small minority of fundamentalist religious Jews who are keeping this going. and have some allies in the United States who are also part of the American government. So they're in high positions as well. And it's true. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is to keep this program going. And America has always been behind this and support American Jews and supported this. And we keep it going. As a Jew who raised my family in an Orthodox synagogue, I can tell you there is a pain in my heart every day of my life about this. And what is it going to take to change this situation? Because this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable for the principles of the religious tradition that I was taught. I teach in a Buddhist Zen seminary now. I should mention that as well. So anyway, so I challenge that part of the narrative, that somehow Jews are not safe. I think they're safer than they've ever been, and luckier than they've ever been, and more privileged than they've ever been. So I want to say
thank you. Yes, thank you, Merle. Thank you, thank you, Aura. My goodness, this is a tough discussion, and I really appreciate everyone being very kind to each other and listening, and this has been phenomenal. So thank you for this, and I will send it back to Arthur. Arthur, take it away.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really a fascinating discussion. I wish we could go on for hours, but I know many people have to move on to other things. I want to just thank both of you so much for joining us. I know it's a very busy time for both of you. And I think we're really onto something crucial here. We're seeing the world now veering toward a new Cold War with China, with Russia. We're seeing an incredible mix of diversity and humanity arising, and at the same time the threats intensifying. And I just hope that Tom is right, that all emerges into a new era where we finally break through to what Gary called the people-powered planet, or what he's calling the age of Aquarius, an age where we do really find a way to get past this barrier to build peace in our world. I hope everyone will come back on June 9th, when we'll have Joanne Dufour, who is talking about nuclear weapons nowadays, what you can know and do. And she's talked about how recent actions have sharply increased the danger of nuclear war. You know, we kind of think that was something in the past where people were growing up with that constant fear, but it really is becoming overwhelmingly dangerous at this point. And she's talking about the evolution of the science that led to nuclear weapons, and how weapons, anyway, the whole thing about how we can move that to the power of nonviolent resistance. So this will be very important. And then the week beyond that, we're having World Beyond War. So do come every week. And I will now, at same time, and I will now also, by the way, invite everyone to come, if you haven't yet seen the film or signed up on our website, to go to theworldismycountry.com. Let all your friends know that they can now get tickets to watch our movie right there online, and that this is a way that we can come together to do what's been talked about to help evolve this future we all want to live in. So Merle and Aura, last comments, and tell us how we get in touch and follow up with both of you.
My last comment is that, having been at Los Alamos for so long as a guest scientist, that Los Alamos National Laboratory is building the next generation of nuclear weapons.
Maybe you'll join us next week as we talk
No.
about that.
I can't do, but thank you, Arthur. But I will be listening, and it's really important issue.
Aura,
thank you. I'm just so thrilled about meeting Aura, and how wonderful to hear her take on all of this. And I hope to continue our discussion. I just wanted to say that. And thank you to everybody who taps in and has some wonderful comments. I'm saving the chat. Arthur, thank you so much.
Yes, in
Melanie
the chat,
too. Melanie,
her
thank you.
website, emergentdiplomacy.org. So Aura, how do we get in touch with you and follow up what AFSC is doing?
I welcome the discussion. I know it is an emotional one for many, and I know that it's difficult to get a basis on facts in a situation where news sources can be so different. But I think, again, returning to that foundation of human rights and everybody having a right to security and well-being, and what does that look like in a non-militarized context is really important for us all to be thinking about and focused on. So, and I'm a few minutes late for a congressional meeting, so I'm gonna
Okay.
hop off and move on.
Well, thank you, everyone, and join us next week for another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.